Lives Matter.
Black 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 Lives Matter. When I launched Black Lives Matter, Christine Dean, who was going to speak now, who was speaking on behalf of Black Women's Wellness, Christine was our very first person that we interviewed for our very first podcast, our very first live podcast at the Bush Theatre. Christine, at that time, was the deputy leader for the Women's Equality Party, and she also had been running a campaign called Dying to Give Birth, which was about black female maternal mortality. So it was such a brilliant launch at the Bush Theatre and a live show which was followed by BLN Live, which was Black British Talent. And me and Christine basically got a bit of a relationship going on. We became great friends. And then we talked about this idea of Christine wanting to start Black Women's Wellness podcast. And I'm like, well, why don't we just do it under Black Lives Matter and have it as an umbrella? You can put it out, there'll be a bit of mentoring involved. Christine had never done the podcast before. So that's basically what happened. And we have 3 episodes of Black Women's Wellness, 2 on the menopause, which have been brilliant because a lot of the time, as Black or global majority women, older women, we don't talk about the menopause. So yes, I had a hot flush at the beginning of the presentation. I think it's important to talk about it. It's not anything to be ashamed of. It's like the last part of my female journey or our female journeys, and it's important, like really important. So I just want to thank Christine. It's been a wonderful experience mentoring you, and it's not over yet, is it? We've got much more to do. So I'd just like to welcome to the stage Christine Dean, Black Women's Wellness.
Sorry, excuse me while I get myself set up. Hello, my name is Christine Dean. As LJ said, I became involved with Black Lives Matter as their original guest when they started their podcast over a year and a half ago. I was originally a guest, and now I've evolved to become the creator and host of Black Women's Wellness. Today, I'd like to start by just telling you a little bit about myself. And why I started the podcast in the first place. I've spent most of my working life as a family lawyer. I started out as a solicitor, then I was a barrister, and I specialised in child protection. My passion was advocacy, speaking on behalf of people who couldn't really speak for themselves, and really that was how I started my professional career. Currently, I'm working as a civil servant. I've been a civil servant for the past 6 years. But after leaving the legal profession, I really felt the need that I still wanted to advocate. I still wanted to sort of champion and fight on behalf of other people. So I became politically active. And that is how I became a member of the Women's Equality Party. I held several roles within the party. I started off just as an ordinary member, then I became a committee member, then I ran for political office 3 times, so for the GLA once, and then 2 times trying to be a local councillor, basically again championing for the local community and trying to sort of raise awareness and champion women's rights. I've been very passionate all of my life about women having equal rights. And being represented in all professions, in public life, in private life, and in government spaces. Women are 50% of the population, but we are not represented 50% anywhere in any profession. If you take a look around, we are underrepresented. So that started my passion in terms of championing and promoting and looking for opportunities to push for equality for women, and basically looking at where there were deficits in terms of, well, where are things unfair and unequal. Working within the party allowed me to campaign, as I said, vigorously for women's rights. And I had a passion about improvements in Black women's health outcomes. So I was focusing on that, and I was doing a lot of research about women's issues, health issues. And during that research, I found out that Black women were disproportionately affected by many common health conditions. And it really disturbed me. It's sort of like, well, why is that? You know, what is it about me as a black woman where I always come out bottom in everything? So I chaired a subcommittee working on our party's campaign called Dying to Give Birth. And it was called that for a reason. It was focusing on the statistic that black women in the UK were 5 times more likely to die from childbirth than white women or women of other ethnic backgrounds. And that's a really shocking and high statistic. Similar to the US, we were at that 5 times more sort of death rate. And there wasn't really a lot of research about it. People didn't understand why, but the figure was there and very, very much coming out into the headlines. So I worked with a few organisations like 5 times more, and we raised awareness, you know, about that shocking statistic, and we were trying to find solutions. What could we do to bring that figure down? 3 years later, it's still high. It's now 4 times more. It's no better, but there is some work going towards bringing that figure down. So the Women's Equality Party, in trying to support and raise awareness, during our conference, we put on a panel titled Dying to Give Birth, and we brought together health professionals, doctors, nurses, midwives and doulas, so that we could talk about the 5 times more statistic and talk about the reasons why. And during those discussions, one of the guests that I invited and spoke to, I chaired the panel, was a woman called Dr. Jenny Douglas. Very impressive, been writing about women's health issues for many, many years, very passionate about what she had to say and very informative. And she'd written an article called Black Women's Health Matters, putting black women on the research agenda. And the main takeaways that I had from reading her article and hearing her speak several times were that most research on childbirth and women's health issues focused on white families and white women. That was the norm. And then when they looked at black families and black women, they saw that as a deviation from the norm. So black culture and black traditions were seen as contributory factors to poor outcomes for black women and black families, rather than there being an acknowledgement that there was a flaw in looking at black women's illnesses through the lens of whiteness. So that was coming very much across from what she was writing. There were many preconceived ideas about black women and their symptoms, and very little research about their lived experience. And no matter the illness, no matter what you looked at, black women were disproportionately poorer in terms of their outcomes than white women. So again, through my research, I sort of found in various conditions that there were a lot, you know, in terms of disproportionality, you could pick anything. So I'm going to give you a few examples. A higher percentage of black women suffer from heart disease, stroke, diabetes compared to white women and other ethnic groups. A higher percentage of black women are more likely to die from cancer, cervical cancer, which is easily treatable, compared to white women and other ethnic groups. And black women are more likely to go into labour early, before 37 weeks of pregnancy, than white women and other ethnic groups. And this leads to more black babies with developmental difficulties and higher death rates for black babies. And black women are 3 times more likely than women of other races to get uterine fibroids. So you can see a pattern here. We're coming out at the bottom. You know, if it's a poor outcome, that's where we are. Good outcomes, nowhere to be seen. So I also noted from her writings that there was an intersectionality of racism, and it was a factor that was playing into all of these disproportionate outcomes. And Dr. Douglas used a quote which resonated with me. It said, "Racism is not the only oppression black women face. She is also oppressed in class terms as part of the working class, and in gender terms because she is a woman. So it's no surprise that due to the negative impact of economic insecurity and racism, black women are 10% more likely to suffer from psychological distress than white women." So as I said, this is just a few examples. There are many, many more. You can pick any illness, sickle cell, you can pick any other illnesses that you can think of, endometriosis, you name it. If you're a black woman, you're at the bottom of the pile. So I heard her speak more than one time. She spoke at the conference, she did another conference and I went to hear her speak. And then we did a panel together. And one of her biggest things and sort of passions and regrets is that she'd been striving for over 20 years to get support from the research community to establish a centre of excellence so that they could fund research for black professionals to do work, to do research on black women about their health issues and their outcomes. And today, 20 odd years later, that physical centre of excellence doesn't exist. I really felt her frustration when she was talking. And it really sort of inspired me to think to myself, well, what can I do? What can I do to fill that gap? I'm not a medical professional, but I'm a black woman and I've suffered from many, many illnesses, that impact us. What can I do? So I asked myself the question, what if there was a centre of excellence focused on giving black women advice and guidance on how to improve their health and well-being? And that is how the Black Women's Wellness Podcast was born. What's the aim of the podcast? Like LJ said when she was speaking before, I wanted to create a safe space for black women to congregate. And it's really important for this particular reason to me, because throughout my working life, and I've worked as a lawyer, so I've been in the courts, in chambers, in solicitors' offices, professionally, and in public spaces, and in private spaces, I've often found myself to be the only black person in the room. Taking up space, being acknowledged, being heard, it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of energy. And I wanted to change that dynamic. I wanted it to be a space where black women felt free to talk to black women about black women and their issues. And I wanted it to be a one-stop shop. So what I wanted to create was a space where you could find what you wanted more or less in one place. I find the internet and social media and the vast amounts of information out there very, very challenging. And I found it very daunting, and I wanted black women to have a place where they could just say, well, I can go to Black Women's Wellness, I can hear about people talking about an illness that might impact me, and I can use it as a starting point and then use it for research and discovery. The podcast is unapologetically focused on black women. Centering black women is essential for me. It's very rare for black women to be considered first or centered in anything. And I wanted black women to know this space as being a space for them and about them. And I wanted the space to be an experience that prioritized women, black women, and didn't consider them to be an afterthought. I think it's really important to share information on health issues. And again, I think finding out information on the internet is very challenging for some people. I'm a former solicitor. I should be good at doing research and finding information, but even I found it difficult to find enough information about health issues that impacted me. I didn't really know a lot about things that I should know about my own health conditions now and what might happen to me in the future. I just wanted to make it easier for people to get simple, digestible information, small chunks, so that they could listen to it on the go and just basically just be able to access it whenever they felt that they could listen to the podcast. One of my key things is knowledge is power and leads to self-advocacy, and it's vitally important that black women are empowered to speak up for themselves. One of the things I found when I interviewed a lot of people and spoke to a lot of black women about these issues is that they were really afraid to talk to their GPs. They felt that they were in a sort of like a disproportionate power position, so they weren't actually speaking up and asking the right questions, or they didn't feel empowered to ask the right questions, and I wanted them to be able to be informed that they can then go back to their GPs and then talk about their health issues and to get the help they need. I'm just going to say, just like LJ, I am now having a menopausal power surge. And I just, so again, the sweaty glaze that she talked about, and this is what happens under these lights when you are menopausal, this age, and these things happen. So bear with me, but this is what's going on. So again, it's very vital for black women to have shared lived experiences. I'm sharing my lived experience with LJ's lived experience, so I know that I don't need to be embarrassed about it, because this is what we all go through, and that's what's important. You know, physically and mentally and emotionally, we need to be able to talk about those things and to support everybody's sort of well-being. I wanted black women to hear their stories from their voices and from their perspectives. And sharing lived experiences, as I say, tackles embarrassment and just deals with taboos. The Black Women's Podcast provides a forum for black women to recognise themselves in the stories that are told. And if you get an opportunity to listen, you'll hear the third one, which is about chronic stress and burnout. And whilst I was doing that interview, I could hear myself and see myself in the discussion, but things that were being raised by the expert. And I thought, you know what, this will be really useful for someone who has lots of symptoms but doesn't know or recognise that they are actually burnt out. And it might be a trigger for them to actually seek help. And if it helped one person, then I think that I've done my job in relation to actually producing and putting up that podcast. So straight away I could see the value of having a lived experience, shared stories, and being able to recognise myself in what was being talked about in terms of health. And equally, I think it's important that there should be a space where black women can get advice from black professionals. I think it's essential that you can see and hear representation from black professionals within the health service. I want to get advice from professionals that look like me, that share my lived experience, that understand me, know the nuances, and I don't have to explain absolutely everything, because they know who I am in terms of a black woman, my culture, my traditions, and what things mean to me. And I think that makes a big difference when you're trying to get help and advice about something which is really personal and impactful, like a medical condition which is really debilitating. I want to feel seen and understood, and I think that black women need to know that there are these black professionals out there who can help them, and I wanted to have a space where I could bring them together so people could recognise they exist and then go out and research and look for people in those areas of specialism and expertise. So that was my journey to creating the podcast. As LJ said, the Black Women's Wellness Podcast can be found on Spotify under the umbrella of Black Lives Matter. We are in our infancy, and we've published 3 episodes so far. The first 2 episodes were on menopause in the workplace, symptoms and treatment, and my guests were Pamela Parks, an award-winning HR executive director, and Eiley Bello, the artistic director of Questlife, who's going to speak later, and then the artistic director for Menstruation to Menopause project. The third episode, as I said, was on chronic stress and burnout, and my guest was Lillian Larty, a de-stress and wellness coach. So I'm trying to bring the professionals in, but also have real people give their stories as well, and try to sort of have an interaction and conversation which is real, as I said, so people can recognise themselves within those conversations. So we can be found on Instagram at blackwomen's_wellness, and I'd like to thank you all for coming here today and listening to me, and thank you for giving me your time today. Glass of water.
Sorry, I'll just quickly ask you, I can't quite remember the name of the woman you said you saw somewhere that she was written.
Dr. Jenny Douglas. Yeah. She is a sort of scholar, Oxford University. She works out of that university doing her writings and teachings, and she speaks a lot on black women's health issues, and she really did inspire me in terms of her work that she's been doing for many, many years, but her sort of like passion about trying to have a centre of excellence. And what she says is that in terms of research, there's no money to be, nobody wants to fund it basically because they don't see it as an important issue. Black women are not important, their health outcomes are not important, so why are we spending money on that? They'd rather spend money on other things and globally on women generally and lump all black women from global majorities, ethnic minorities and all races in together, but they don't see black women as a separate group, so they don't want to spend money on it, and that is why there's so little research.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Christine. In view of what you're saying about the sort of lack of focus on, and the lack of, which is also lack of care of black women, do you think there are ways in which, because there are clusters now of black women who are, doing really well in their respective fields, but they have various kind of health conditions or their families might, is there a way in which there can be kind of joining where they're kind of vested interests to kind of, make these issues more important and more of a public stage?
I think what I found is that there are little pockets, as you said, of people doing things, but the level of awareness of how disparate it is or how bad it is in terms of outcomes is really low. And so I think the first job is to raise awareness. Because of the 5 times more campaign, the awareness was raised to a level where the government intervened and started doing work in relation to having subcommittees and having black MPs, female MPs talking about it and trying to do something about those health outcomes. So that was put into the spotlight and that the awareness was raised. But no one's talking about fibroids, no one's talking about endometriosis, no one's talking about sickle cell because it's not important. So until we start to raise awareness in terms of the poor outcomes and say, why is it that this is happening to black women? Why is it that they are not getting access to healthcare, getting access to correct information, being seen early, having early treatment, having intervention when it matters? Until we start asking those questions and raising awareness, nobody's going to care. Until we get the money to fund the research, nobody's going to care. And my perspective is we have to care about ourselves first before anybody else is going to care about us, and that's why we need to raise awareness, and we need, wherever we can, raise awareness and join the dots and bring the groups together.
Yeah, no, thank you. And just to say from the point of view of, being one of the associate curators at Westlife, we really want to support what you're doing because you're not only doing the podcast, but you're involved in the Holland and Barrett video where intergenerational women talking about menopause that came out this week, and you've been, a clarion call for this. So we look forward to seeing you on more platforms and stages. Yeah,
well, I hope to be an advocate and speaker in terms of trying to champion this and just to move it forward. So I think that's one of the things that inspires me and sort of like pushes me on and drives me to do this, is because it's, I don't like the feeling of being at the bottom of the pile of everything. And I just think maybe we need to raise ourselves to the top of importance. There's a question in the back there.
Christine, thank you so much for the talk because it's so very powerful. I just wanted to think, for black community, do you think there's a stigma of being sickness which is attached with feeling shame or not talking about your business to people?
Yeah, one of the sort of things that have come out with the little research that there is that black women have this sort of just pushing through attitude. They're just, suffering in silence. This is what we do. We've got broad shoulders. We're supposed to be strong black women with broad shoulders. So really, we're not supposed to be ill. We're just supposed to be able to just grin and bear it and just get on with it. And so that sort of evolutionary idea about our role as black women within the family and the fact that we need to keep working and it's more important to feed our children and to make sure the home is okay and then get them educated rather than looking after ourselves is an attitude that we need to change in terms of really focusing on looking after ourselves first so that we can look after everyone else. So I think that is part of the problem why, we don't really focus on health first and putting ourselves first and actually, changing the dynamic in relation to how we understand illness. when we were doing the menopause project, one of the things that we found was that the question was asked, well, when you were growing up, what were the discussions you had about the menopause? And I said, we didn't talk about it. Why would we? Our mums didn't talk about it, our grandmothers didn't talk about it. So until it actually happens to you, you think, oh, yes, this is what happens in the life cycle of a woman. You have menopause. But other than that, it's not part of any discussion whatsoever. It just hits you, and then you suddenly have to deal with it. And our mothers and grandmothers, in my experience, basically just got on with it, grinned and bear it, and never discussed it. It may have been called the change, but that was it, and that's as much as you knew. So what we need to do now is to talk about it, when it happens, the different stages, what the symptoms are, the fan,
as it's happening.
the flush,
as it's happening on stage.
and what I now call it a power surge. Let's not talk about it in a negative way. Let's talk about it in a positive way. One of the things we discussed when we did the thing for Holland and Barrett was that you have graduations, you have birthday parties, you have bar mitzvahs, you have all sorts of things. Why can't we have a menopause party? It's a change, it's a transition. Why is it under the carpet? Let's get it out into the open and talk about it, because it involves and impacts everybody. When you're menopausal, it impacts you in terms of your relationship with your children, in terms of your relationship with your husband, your work colleagues, and everybody. So, and we're all going to go through it. It's not like, it happens to some of us, it happens to all of us as women. So therefore, it should be talked about universally, and we should raise awareness and get it something that's not. It should be something that's not swept under the carpet. It should be openly discussed amongst everybody. Any more questions?
Yeah, I think you touched on this right at the beginning of the talk. The problem is, obviously, things like menopause and things like lots of illnesses that people experience are ignored primarily because the person who's going to seek that advice or that support is a woman. So we have that, but then we have this intersection with the fact that the reason it's doubly ignored is because you're a black woman, and I think that's the kind of, how can I put it, that's systemic racism that we as black women face when we might decide, okay, well, I can talk about this, because we know that or we experience that negative feedback when you go to a GP or your health provider or whatever, and you get a kind of, what's wrong with you? You get this kind of unsupportive help. That then again stops people seeking that help. So it's a circle. There's no point in me asking for help because I'm expected not to need help.
Yeah, and also when you're talking about going to your GP, I'm nearly 58. I think it's very rare that I actually go to the GP and it's a black person. More often than not, it's a it's a white man, or it's a white woman, and very rarely is it anybody of global majority. So again, you've got that barrier in terms of talking to somebody about something that's really personal when you think they don't really know me or understand me or what's going on in my life and my culture. And I want to speak up, but I'm really not sure what I can say or what I can ask for, and what's available to me. So you've got all of those barriers before you even get anywhere close to getting the right advice.
Like in the borough, I work for public health, and the statistics are just like frightening. Like the 5 times more. If I'm a person of colour and I'm in the surgery, I'm 3 times more likely to spend time waiting than if I'm a white person. So I'll just sit in there longer. And so because I know, well, I don't know, but because that happens, then I become to accept that and expect that to happen. I expect to wait. I expect to not be seen. I expect to not be understood. So that just flavours my total experience. And like you say, then I think there's no point in me going.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I find it quite frightening in terms of when you do the research, the vast array of illnesses or injuries or things that impact us as black people and black women, where we don't get the service that we deserve. And it's very hard, as I say, and you have to put a lot of energy into trying to change that. And you're chipping away at the coalface, but I'm a person that doesn't give up, so I will just keep going no matter what. And being here today is an opportunity to raise my voice, to raise awareness, and to hopefully spread the word. And if 1 person or 2 people or 3 people take it away and start talking about it because they heard about it from me, then that is paving the way and getting the momentum started. We have to have not a moment, but a movement in terms of trying to raise this awareness.
I'm wondering, Christine, whether we, as part of Black Women's Wellness, we could set up a sort of maybe like a sort of like an online advocacy group. Because one thing that's becoming very aware for me is that we have to sort of self-advocate, and where that needs to really start is kind of again with us holding hands and doing that, because and certainly even within my work in theatre in terms of access requirements, you have to be a loud voice that advocating for yourself. But perhaps if we can create some sort of advocacy group where we're like, look, where it's like maybe just a sort of like a just a chat sort of room type thing where we can like discuss that and how we've done it, because a number of conversations have cropped up with women off the back of the menopause thing. I spoke to a woman who gave up her job in her menopause because of all the, and she was doing great, right? Because of the hot flushes and like me, I've got the rage and I've got this voice, you know, right? And it's like, but you're, you know, like you were saying, you're at this point where you're like so skillful, so much, you know, you should be in your senior leadership point, and women are going, I'm going to just dip out of am I going to stop my job?
Yeah, and there's a movement now to sort of like have menopause policies at work for women to be supported in the workplace. And so, but it's a new thing. You know, you would think that menopause only just appeared a couple of years ago when it's been its time immemorial. But suddenly it's the big thing now that everybody wants to talk about it and champion it at work and all the rest of it. But again, it's about accessing that in terms and feeling safe to access it and dealing with all the other things that go along with work and why you wouldn't be promoted and why you're being overlooked, and women, black women in particular, wanting to do, you know, having to do 110% or 150%, you know, whereas, you know, other white colleagues are, you know, doing 75% and being mediocre and being, you know, sort of promoted, whereas we have to do 150% just to stay at level. And then you had on the menopause and you just think, well, you know, what else can go wrong, you know?
But I certainly, and I can't remember what the term's called, and I read it about an article, it's African American, but there's actually sort of like a sort of higher mortality rate within black people because they work harder, and they've done this based on this black guy who pulled a train, right, to prove how strong he was. And it's like, and we're all told it, right? We're all going, you've got to do that much better. I mean, my mum, who's white, right, but would used to be, she's going, I'm tough on you because you're black and you're a woman. I'm like, well, can you just be nice, because the rest of the world are going to be tough on me. But we're told this, work harder, do better, go the extra mile. Well, that takes its toll on us physically, mentally and emotionally.
Yeah, I think the phrase is we have to work twice as hard to get half as much. And that's what's ingrained in you as you're growing up. So that's why we're always working, which means that we're the ones that suffer physically and mentally because we're burning ourselves out.
Yeah, and then add neurodiversity, because when you said that, you have to do twice as much work if you're neurodiverse, right? So someone's ahead of you, but you've done twice as much work and you're not doing, you know. So if you add the neurodiversity, which actually gives a new aspect to menopause as well, because I know it increases your some of the issues around neurodiversity. So I think that might be a really interesting menopause, a third one to talk about the impact of neurodiversity on menopause as well. But yeah, I love all the conversations that are opening up in Black Women's Wellness, and I look forward to many, many, many more.
I'm very pleased to hear that, and that was basically my aim, to open up conversation, to broaden the discussions in relation to health outcomes for black women and issues that impact them. And again, I'm very pleased to be invited to speak here today and to be able to talk to you about this issue, and for it to be well received, but also thought-provoking and something that might germinate things for you going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Black Lives Matter.
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 Black Lives